Having it, folks. Today's episode is brought to you by cheap baseball caps that look fantastic until you put them on your head. The Ritual is a 2017 British supernatural folk horror film, directed by David Bruckner and based on a novel of the same name by Adam Neville. Some people felt the movie's darker tones and realistic characters and exceptional creature design made it stand out as a folk horror, while other people felt when the forces pursuing the characters shifted from ethereal to actual, the story kind of lost its edge. So, today, we're going to take a look at The Ritual. You can decide if it's something you want to see or something you would rather take out to the forest behind your house and nail up to a tree. If you haven't seen the movie, that'll make more sense later on. The movie opens with a prologue in a pub where Luke, Phil, Hutch, Dom, and Rob are trying to nail down where to have their annual boys' holiday. For a change of pace, Rob suggests heading to Sweden for a proper hiking trip. The rest of the boys suggest that holiday should have happened 10 years earlier, if ever. On their way home, Luke and Rob pop in to grab a bottle of vodka for the house, not realizing they've interrupted a violent robbery in progress. Luke's fight-or-flight response sends him cowering behind the shelving, while Rob is killed by the men. The scene is quick and blunt and realistic enough to leave us with an understanding what it might have felt like to be there. The story picks up again 6 months later with the boys honoring Rob's memory with a hiking trip in Sweden. The soundtrack is immediately ominous, and the vast barren landscape swallows the men up whole in the palm of its hand. There's a tension between the four friends. When Hutch tells Luke he doesn't blame him for what happened, Luke's lack of response says more than any words could have. In my personal experience, this movie conveys the male group dynamic as accurately as it does the masculinity dynamic in terms of the pressures men put on themselves and the pressures everyone else puts on them, justified or otherwise. After erecting a stone monument commemorating Rob's life, they head back to their lodge, and a moment later, when Dom twists his knee, nobody seems overly concerned, implying he's done this kind of thing before. And after some discussion, they decide the only way forward is directly through the forest to shorten the distance back. And at the 15-minute point of the film, they bring the first act to a close when Hutch ignores the fact he can't get a read on his compass, and they enter the forest anyway. If you pay attention to these sorts of things, which of course I do here on the channel, I mean, it's probably why you're here. I'm mad at the hat and I'm taking it out on you. I am sorry. If you pay attention to these sorts of things, a forest in a film can be a physical representation of unresolved grief. I'm sure you can imagine the isolating and disorienting and even punishing feeling of being guilt-ridden over a friend's death. And superficially, that sounds very similar to being lost in a dense forest. And the symbolism here is driven even deeper by the irony this specific forest is completely unknowable to these men because it's in Sweden, a country they never would have visited if it wasn't for the death of their friend. We already have a sense of the tension between these friends. We know what's causing it. It's a very male tension. It's one I personally related to immediately during my first viewing. Also, with very little dialogue, they're doing a brilliant job conveying the awkwardness between four men trapped within a highly emotional situation. If a movie's opening act is going to be effective, it has to accomplish several things. One of the most important things is establishing the central conflict that we're going to follow going forward. And in 15 tightly written minutes, this opening act has set Luke on a journey to fight against the bewildering and heavy regret and remorse he's clearly shouldering on what was supposed to be a fun lad's holiday. As the boys are reminiscing about the meals they'll have once they're back at the lodge, they happen upon a moose, gutted and hanged high in the trees. As disturbing a sight as it is, the fact it's still bleeding sends them hiking double speed to get away from whatever might have done it, as it's probably still close by. With night closing in and the skies opening up around them, a number of strange symbols suddenly appear on the trees. When they find an abandoned cabin, they all agree it's best to break into it for some temporary shelter. Luke is convinced he's heard something outside, but they write it off as wildlife. What they can't write off as easily is the decapitated human torso effigy upstairs with the antlers for arms. That night, Luke's trauma invades his reality when his guilty mind recreates the shop in the middle of the forest. This aspect of the film adds an element of psychological horror many folk horrors lack, and Rafe Spall's subtle, understated conveyance of the complicated and damaged male psyche following a life-altering event such as Rob's death drives those psychological aspects home in a very believable way. When he wakes up, something has punctured him. Hutch is screaming inside, having pissed his pants. Dom is terrified and in tears without knowing why, but Phil has it the worst, as he wakes up naked and praying to the effigy upstairs, and it's creepy as fuck. The men get dressed and get out of the cabin as quickly and quietly as possible, and outside, they find the symbols everywhere. And the men do what men do. Phil desperately wants to understand what happened, but nobody else wants to talk about it. So they argue about arguing and press onward over the men's silence and the faint, faraway sound of something breathing out in the woods. When Luke heads up to see if he can spot anything in the distance from the top of a ridge, he spots something gigantic. When he tries telling the boys about it, it brings the entire situation to a head when Dom refuses to believe him. Out of anger and frustration, Luke blames Dom for them being lost in the forest, but Dom immediately counters, blaming Luke for them being in Sweden at all. Dom says Rob's skull was shattered, but Luke came out of the shop without a spot of blood on him. So, Luke decks him, because that's what men do sometimes when they're not sure what else to do. When Luke asks Hutch if he blames him for Rob's death too, Hutch answers honestly and says he doesn't know. That cranks the tension up between the men thicker than the Swedish foliage. During the silence, they come across a buried tent with a wallet and a family's worth of identification registered back to 1984. That night, after more visualizations of Luke's trauma, they are woken by Phil's screaming. Hutch's tent is torn open and he is nowhere to be found. When they do eventually find him, they wish they really hadn't. On a personal side note, Hutch has one of the most realistic dead faces I have ever seen in a film. As they finally reach the ridge where they can see the lodge in the distance, Phil's taken too, and Luke and Dom are left to flee to a small settlement where they are not as welcomed as they'd hoped they'd be. The second act closes abruptly when the remaining two boys are knocked unconscious. Throughout the entirety of the second act, David Bruckner makes expert use out of the natural Swedish surroundings. He shows us tiny glimpses of things to encourage us to keep looking for things, even when there aren't necessarily any things to look for in that particular scene. You find yourself constantly scanning the trees while people are talking, and it plays perfectly off the paranoia of the circumstances and of the natural setting. In addition to the symbolism of the forest itself and what it represents for Luke, you can view the creature pursuing them, or the guardian of this forest, as a physical representation of guilt. It is ageless and highly judgmental and relentless in its pursuit of you. The creature is Luke's guilt, and it places images in Luke's head, just like guilt does. When they wake up, Luke is inspected and confirmed as a chosen person, while Dom is taken away and prepared for sacrifice. When Dom's brought back, he tells Luke they're going to kill him by giving him to the creature. And he pleads with Luke to escape and to burn the place to the ground and to tell his wife he tried to get back to her. And in an unfortunate, forced sort of way, this closes off the open loop between the lifelong friends, as Dom is acknowledging sometimes the only thing you can do is to try and survive. The creature appears to Dom in the form of his wife, but only for a moment. Meanwhile, Luke escapes his bindings and finds a ghastly collection of elders up the stairs. They are the immortality promised by the creature, who feeds on weakness and despair. It offers them eternal life, but they are trapped in that eternal life in a state of permanent misery. The misery is of their own choosing, as each of them chose not to face the pain the creature offered to hide from them. Not understanding this arrangement, Luke sets them on fire and frees them. After jabbing and shooting his way out of the building, he fires his last bullet into the creature, who shrugs it off like a bug bite. With the village of worshippers burnt to the ground, the creature pursues Luke, drawn to the deep-seated shame and regret he singled him out and marked him for in the first place. After repeatedly forcing Luke into submission, he reminds him of the alternative, of the hurt and the misery he'll face if he leaves the forest and the creature's promise of an eternal pain-free life. This leaves Luke with a clear choice. He can give in and stay trapped in his misery eternally as a worshipper of this creature, his his own guilt, or he can choose to face what's tormenting him and turn his back on the monster forever. As a physical manifestation of Luke's inner struggles, we can interpret this as the creature presenting Luke with a very literal instruction to bow down and admit defeat to his guilt. Luke chooses otherwise, and with his choice comes a chance to escape. Outside the tree line, he sees his guilt remaining within the forest, not because it can't follow him, but because Luke chose not to allow it to. As a story examining themes like survivor's guilt and masculinity and the expectations surrounding masculinity, this movie raises a number of interesting questions. As much as we have all imagined at some point in our lives how we would conduct ourselves during an unimaginable scenario like the one presented at the start of this movie, none of us actually know how we would react or how others might react to our reactions if that were to actually happen. Some people complained about the ending of this movie. I am particularly fond of it because it is messy and inexact. It's not like Luke slayed the mythical beast and magically turned back time. All of his friends are still hanging from the trees. And that speaks to the idea not just of trauma, but working your way through trauma after you've experienced it, because as shitty as it is, it's a fact. We've all got friends in the trees. If you've seen The Ritual, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments section. As this was a bit of a heavier movie, I will bounce back next time with something lighter, I promise. As always, thank you very much for watching my little video, and until next time, folks.